Picture this. A man stands in his suburban driveway, loading a minivan with soccer equipment, lunchboxes, and car seats. His friends see him and think, "What a responsible guy. What a good father. What a complete man." But Arthur Schopenhauer, the master of philosophical pessimism, would call this man a fool. Not because he lacks love for his children, but because he fails to understand how life actually works. If children were brought into the world by an act of pure reason alone, Schopenhauer insisted, the human race would quickly cease to exist. The biological imperative would not stand a chance against philosophical clarity. Here lies the problem with having children. You don't create happiness. You create suffering. You don't build a family. You build a prison. You don't become a man. You become a slave. The man who believes fatherhood is the pinnacle of purpose is, in Schopenhauer's eyes, tragically deluded. Walk through any playground, any school pickup line, any family gathering, and you'll find them. Men who have confused biological impulse with conscious choice, duty with desire, social programming with personal calling. They wake up at 3 a.m. to change diapers and call it love. They work overtime to pay for daycare and call it responsibility. They forfeit their dreams in favor of their children's needs and call it maturity. And they believe, deeply, that these sacrifices make them fulfilled. But to Schopenhauer, these men are merely victims of nature's grand illusion. The will to live is the source of all suffering, and procreation is its most devious mechanism. These men believe they chose to have children when, in fact, it was biology that chose for them. The entire performance of fatherhood, with its rituals and obligations, is a stage upon which men act out a script written not by conscious will, but by genetic compulsion. And while they see themselves as architects of legacy, others watch and make silent calculations. The smart ones recognize the cage, the wise ones see the chains, and the enlightened walk away entirely. We do not admire obvious sacrifice, we pity it. We do not respect willing slavery, we question it. We do not envy the overburdened, we avoid becoming them. And this cultural misunderstanding leads to a catastrophic mistake. The modern father mistakes his burden for his purpose. He writes checks his happiness cannot cash. He enters into a war against his own interests, a war that he is doomed to lose. Because life, Schopenhauer believed, is essentially suffering, and to create life is to multiply suffering. Despite this, the modern father violates this truth at every turn. He brings new consciousness into a world defined by pain. He creates beings destined for disappointment. He transforms his own brief moment of freedom into a machine designed to perpetuate misery. And when reality begins to settle in, it hits hard. All love, Schopenhauer wrote, is founded on sexual impulse, no matter how ethereal it may appear. This is the devastating truth that unravels so many men who choose to have children. You didn't choose this life. You were seduced into it. That moment you fell in love, got swept up in romance, started talking about our future. You weren't exercising rational agency. You were being manipulated by what Schopenhauer called nature's greatest trick, the illusion of love, designed to serve the survival of the species. Nature achieves its ends through illusion. Love is the bait, and you are the prey. It convinces you that you're making meaningful, romantic choices, but in truth, you are being coerced, biologically, into fulfilling the reproductive agenda of the species. The tragedy is that most men never stop to ask themselves the right questions. Do I actually want the responsibilities of parenthood? Am I ready for the emotional and financial toll it will take? What will I lose in this process? Is this truly a decision made by reason, or am I simply acting on deeply ingrained biological programming? By the time these questions surface, it is often too late. The romantic decision has become a philosophical consequence, and at best, you love your children while mourning your lost possibilities. At worst, you resent your children and mourn your lost life. The reproductive impulse does not care about your happiness. It does not factor your dreams or desires into its equation. It acts quietly, strategically, and without warning, leaving you trapped before you even know what happened. The truly wise man does not get caught in romantic delusions. He does not need to validate his relationship through procreation. He does not need to create new life in order to feel alive himself. This is where having children becomes not just a personal decision, but a dangerous one. You trade your authentic self for a socially applauded role that philosophy has long condemned. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. And if he does not love solitude, he cannot love freedom. For it is only in solitude that one becomes truly free. This is the core of Schopenhauer's view. Freedom and parenthood are fundamentally incompatible. The moment you become responsible for another consciousness, you can no longer be fully responsible to your own. Yet the modern father walks willingly into this contradiction. He assigns himself the task of caring for beings who will consume his time, his money, and his attention unrelentingly for decades. He ensures that solitude becomes a distant memory, freedom a lost luxury, and authentic choice an unattainable fantasy. And once you become the eternally responsible one, you attract a universe that sees you not through the lens of love, but as a resource to be mined. That's the lie of romance, masked by systematic extraction. Your children demand food, shelter, education, entertainment, emotional support, and unceasing vigilance. Your partner expects attention, validation, and shared domestic labor. Society piles on more. It needs you to be a provider, a protector, a role model, a taxpayer. And you think you're winning, because everyone calls you responsible. But what you've really done is surrender everything that made you an individual. Schopenhauer called this the blindness of the will, the inability to recognize that what looks like purpose is often cleverly disguised enslavement, that what appears meaningful can conceal profound emptiness, that social validation frequently precedes personal disintegration. In a world where finite energy is met with infinite demands, every parental commitment becomes a shackle. Every school event becomes an obligation. Every family vacation transforms into an expensive duty. Every bedtime story becomes time stolen from your own thoughts. And when you've made yourself indispensable, everyone becomes dependent on you. People who might have once been equals now become burdens. Relationships that were once voluntary turn mandatory. Choices that once felt open now become predetermined paths from which you cannot deviate. This is what Schopenhauer described as the suffering of attachment, when your peace becomes a hostage to others' satisfaction, when your joy must be postponed until everyone else's needs are met, and when your freedom becomes someone else's security blanket. And the worst part is that the solution is never what the father expects. You can't buy your way out. You can't schedule your way out. You can't even love your way out, because the structure itself is flawed. A man's delight in anticipating satisfaction is itself a kind of pleasure, one enjoyed in advance. But that anticipation robs the moment when it arrives. The more you look forward to something, the less you enjoy it when it comes. This is the cruel joke of fatherhood, the promise of legacy, of emotional riches, of deep meaning. It dissolves upon contact with reality. You think you're creating something that will last beyond you, that your children will carry your memory, that they'll extend your values. But more often than not, what you're actually creating is more suffering under the disguise of continuity. Legacy built on consciousness is legacy built on quicksand. Your children will not remember you the way you want. They will not carry your dreams. They will pursue their own. They will not honor your sacrifices. They will either take them for granted or resent them entirely. Every individual, Schopenhauer wrote, is merely another short dream of the eternal will of nature, a flicker in an endless series. But the modern father operates from the opposite illusion, that reproduction equals permanence, that family is immunity from meaninglessness. Watch what happens to men who root their identity in their children. The successful entrepreneur becomes Emily's dad. His achievements, once admired, become secondary to his role as a parent. His individuality fades into the background. His selfhood is swallowed whole by the very beings he helped create. Beings who didn't ask to be born and may not even appreciate the cost of their existence. The idea that children offer enduring meaning is the inversion of philosophical truth. Real meaning is not inherited. It's created. Authentic legacy emerges not from DNA, but from ideas. Genuine immortality lies not in procreation, but in contribution to knowledge, to art, to humanity's shared understanding. And this distinction has very real consequences. Your children will live their own lives. They will move out, form new bonds, prioritize their own interests. The intensive period of hands-on parenting lasts less than 2 decades. The consequences of that choice last a lifetime. You trade 20 years of autonomy for 20 years of responsibility, with no guarantee that the emotional return will be positive or even reciprocal. Meanwhile, the man who chose philosophical development over biological reproduction has spent those same years mastering a craft, cultivating wisdom, building meaningful connections, exploring the richness of his own mind. Which of these lives contains more authentic meaning? The one who changed 5,000 diapers, or the one who changed 5,000 minds? All satisfaction, Schopenhauer wrote, is negative in essence. It is not true gain, but the temporary easing of suffering. What we call happiness is merely the relief of discomfort. This is the real nature of the joy of parenthood. It's not pure joy. It's relief. Relief from the social pressure of being childless. Relief from the anxiety society manufactures, then sells back to you as purpose. You were made to feel incomplete without children, so having them feels like salvation. But here is the brutal economic truth. Children do not complete you financially. They bankrupt you systematically, not just in terms of money, but in flexibility, opportunity, optionality. The father imagines he's investing in a future, but what he's really doing is mortgaging his present for an outcome that may never materialize. His time is gone, his sleep is gone, his energy is gone. And yet he tells himself it's worth it, because that's the only way he can survive it. The tragedy of life, Schopenhauer wrote, reveals itself only when seen in detail. From afar, it may seem noble, even comic. But up close, it is unmistakably tragic. Take the comedy of financial planning for parenthood. You try to estimate college tuition that will outpace your earnings, budget for healthcare that multiplies unpredictably, plan for enrichment activities that exceed your means. Meanwhile, the childless man is investing the same resources into appreciating assets, scalable skills, intellectual freedom. He maintains the flexibility to act decisively when opportunity knocks. His risk profile is unburdened. His schedule remains his own. So who has more security after 20 years? The man with dependence and obligations, or the man with autonomy and resources? But this economic enslavement goes even deeper. Having children creates what economists call path dependency. Each parental choice restricts your future ones. You can't relocate freely because of school districts. You can't pivot professionally because your income must be steady. You can't take entrepreneurial risks because dependents require safety. The childless man retains what Schopenhauer considered sacred: optionality. the ability to change course when new information emerges, the freedom to chase truth over tradition, exploration over entrapment, reason over reflex. And this isn't selfishness, it's philosophical consistency. If life is suffering, and suffering stems from lack, then creating new beings who lack is not noble, it's negligent. All willing springs from deficiency. All striving is rooted in unmet desire. Every conscious being you create inherits a structure of suffering punctuated only by fleeting reprieves. You are not giving the gift of life. You are imposing the burden of consciousness. And think deeply about that burden. You are ensuring that your children will feel pain, that they will fall ill, that they will suffer heartbreak, fear, existential dread, that they will be rejected, disappointed, and eventually, inevitably, face death. You are not saving them. You are sentencing them. Schopenhauer's conclusion is chilling, but clear. Since there is more pain than pleasure in the world, since every satisfaction merely gives way to new desire or new distress, non-existence is preferable. The agony of the devoured is greater than the pleasure of the devourer. And yet we call this process virtuous. We look upon a sleeping child and feel tenderness, not recognizing that we have doomed them to the same cycle of longing and loss that plagues us. And here lies the final philosophical question. If you had the choice, truly, between never existing or living a life marked by equal parts pleasure and pain, which would you rationally choose? You cannot ask the unborn, but you can reflect on your own experience. How much of your life has been marked by true satisfaction versus some form of dissatisfaction, fear, or grief? Schopenhauer's point is not that life contains no joy, it is that the joys never justify the suffering. And once you internalize this truth, something radical happens. You stop seeing childlessness as a deficiency and begin to see it as a conscious moral act. You are not depriving the world of new joy. You are sparing it guaranteed suffering. You are refusing to multiply pain. This is why the great philosophical traditions, Buddhism, Stoicism, various forms of asceticism, recognized procreation as a problem, not a virtue. They understood what modern culture has forgotten. The creation of consciousness is the creation of suffering. A man can do what he ought to do, but he cannot will what he ought to will. Most of our so-called desires are not our own. They are planted by social forces that profit from our compliance. And nowhere is this more obvious than in the relentless social pressure to have children. From birth, society scripts you. You are given toy trucks and told you'll be a provider someday. You watch movie heroes fight for their families, absorbing the message that fatherhood is manhood. You hear endless talk of carrying on the family name. All of this programming serves society's needs, not yours. Society needs workers, taxpayers, soldiers, and consumers. It needs people willing to sacrifice personal flourishing for collective stability. It depends on individuals prioritizing the continuation of the group over the development of the self. The masses, Schopenhauer said, are nothing but copies poorly executed. The man who has children simply because that's what people do is not making a philosophical choice. He's running an old program, becoming a copy of previous generations rather than an original expression of his own consciousness. And social conformity, Schopenhauer warned, is the enemy of authentic wisdom. When you do what everyone else does, you get what everyone else gets. A life of quiet desperation disguised as normal responsibility. The truly philosophical man interrogates the basic assumptions. Why should I reproduce? What do I personally gain from parenthood? How does having children serve my authentic development? What would my life look like if I ignored social expectations entirely? These questions terrify most people because they strip away the myths. They reveal how much of what we call natural is actually manufactured consent. They show how deeply systems of power have embedded themselves in our most intimate decisions. The wise recognize that social pressure and philosophical truth usually point in opposite directions. Society wants you to have children because it needs future participants. Philosophy advises you not to, because consciousness is suffering. Society tells you parenthood is fulfilling. Philosophy shows you fulfillment comes from wisdom, not reproduction. Society promises children will give life meaning. Philosophy demonstrates meaning arises from understanding, not from creating new dependence. Choose philosophy over sociology. Choose consciousness over conformity. Choose your own authentic development over society's reproductive requirements. The man who understands what he is does not need children to validate his existence. The man who understands what the world is does not wish to force new consciousness into it. And here's what changes when you stop seeing parenthood as mandatory and start seeing it as optional. You become more authentic, not less. More fulfilled, not less. More wise, not less. Real fulfillment doesn't need to reproduce itself. It shows up in your work, your relationships, your understanding. People sense genuine fulfillment the way they sense genuine wisdom, not because you announce it, but because it radiates from you. Not because you prove it through procreation, but because you demonstrate it through the depth of your being. Schopenhauer's insight about lasting satisfaction is stark. It's never about creating more consciousness. It's about developing the consciousness you already have. Sometimes that means focusing on your work. Sometimes it means cultivating friendships. Sometimes it means pursuing understanding. The father has only one focus, his children, so every problem looks like something that needs family consultation. Every decision, something that affects the kids. Every opportunity, something to be evaluated for its impact on parental responsibilities. The philosophically minded person has many focuses: personal development when appropriate, intellectual pursuits when meaningful, creative expression when inspired, spiritual understanding when called. This diversity is what makes him genuinely wise, not because he's selfish, but because he's comprehensive. Not because he avoids responsibility, but because he chooses it consciously. Not because he rejects love, but because he doesn't confuse love with biological compulsion. He has learned Schopenhauer's greatest lesson. Wisdom is about understanding reality, not perpetuating it. Fulfillment comes from consciousness developed, not consciousness multiplied. Real meaning emerges from philosophical insight, not biological productivity. So maybe the question isn't, how can I be a good father? Maybe it's, how can I develop authentic wisdom? How can I understand existence deeply? How can I live according to reason rather than instinct? The smartest thing you can do is not learning to be a better parent, but learning to be more conscious, more questioning, more philosophically sophisticated, more willing to choose reason over reproduction. Because when you become someone who understands life rather than someone who just perpetuates it, when you become someone who develops wisdom rather than someone who creates dependence, when you become someone who thinks deeply rather than someone who breeds automatically, that's when you discover what authentic existence feels like. And it does not require having children at all. In fact, it requires the opposite: the courage to choose consciousness over biology, wisdom over conformity, and philosophical development over reproductive programming. The assumption that children are necessary for a meaningful life is philosophy's greatest enemy. Schopenhauer understood what most men are only beginning to grasp. The decision to have children is the most important choice you'll never consciously make, unless you make it consciously. For millennia, men have been biological automatons driven by romantic illusion into reproductive commitments they never philosophically evaluated. The result? Centuries of male suffering disguised as fulfillment, financial slavery disguised as responsibility, and philosophical unconsciousness disguised as maturity. But we live in unprecedented times. For the first time in human history, you have complete reproductive control. You have economic independence from traditional family structures. You have social permission to remain childless. You have philosophical frameworks to understand these choices. You have the wisdom of thinkers like Schopenhauer to guide you. The philosophical analysis overwhelmingly supports his pessimistic conclusions. Having children represents the triumph of biology over philosophy, unconsciousness over consciousness, social programming over individual authenticity. Choosing not to have children means escaping biological programming disguised as love, avoiding the multiplication of suffering disguised as meaning, preserving authentic freedom disguised as selfishness, maintaining philosophical consistency disguised as childlessness. Schopenhauer's final question haunts every thinking man. Would not a man rather have so much sympathy with the coming generation as to spare it the burden of existence? The answer, if you're honest, is yes. And that is exactly why not having children may be the wisest thing you can do, and why doing the opposite may be the most foolish. This is not a call for bitterness or withdrawal. It is a call for lucidity, to look unflinchingly at the reality behind the myths, to see love for what it is, nature's bait, not philosophy's gift, to see parenthood for what it often becomes, a cage disguised as a calling, to see freedom for what it truly is, the courage to live by reason rather than instinct, and to understand that the deepest compassion you can offer is not to create more beings destined to suffer, but to develop the consciousness already here, your own. In the end, authentic existence is not about adding more lives to the ledger. It's about deepening the life you have. It's not about perpetuating the species. It's about transcending the illusions of the species. It's not about being a good father in society's eyes. It's about becoming a wise individual in your own. The man who chooses this path does not escape responsibility. He chooses it differently. He directs it inward, to cultivate himself rather than reproduce himself. And that, Schopenhauer would say, is the beginning of genuine freedom.